All right, ladies and gentlemen, all of my friends and neighbors, I'm so excited that we're joining together on this 40th anniversary of Zingerman's. Let's get a round of applause. There we go. All right. For those of you who didn't read the event description or got this as a gift, welcome to our 40th anniversary tasting featuring Micki, Maynard, author of Satisfaction Guaranteed, which features the Zingerman story and especially the last couple of years of surviving the pandemic. I'm really fortunate that in addition to Micki tonight, we have Ari and Paul, the two founders of Zingerman's, along with Grace Singleton, who's one of our current managing partners. So excited to have these guys here. We're gonna get started. We've got some food on the table that Ari's gonna introduce in just a second. And then in about 45 minutes, we've got Reuben's coming up. So they're coming hot off the grill for that full Zingerman's experience. Without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to the lovely folks behind me and we'll rock and roll.
Weird because I can't see you. And this is all, one of the big changes of the pandemic when I had to say everything's different is I stopped wearing my glasses because with the mask they fall off and fog up. And so not wearing a mask, I realized I could put my glasses back on. So other than driving, I think this is only like the second time in 2 years that I've had them on indoors. So that really, if you wanted this to be a special event, there you go. Food. Is that what we're going to talk about, Grace?
I think that sounds great.
So I guess before we even get to questions, food is really where a lot of this started for us and remains to this day. A lot of what inspired me. It's not the only thing. I just wrote a whole piece about the people, which is a huge part, as I'm sure we'll talk about. But the food has always been at the core of what we do. So Grace has picked 3 things for you to taste of the, I don't know how many thousands of products that are in our organization today, but they're all a good story. So I'm going to start anarchistically at the bottom with Marina Colonna's olive oil. So my connection with Marina Colonna, who's in the Molise region of Italy, which is if you go to Rome and drive due east for a few hours, you'll get to her place. And this dates back to the days long before there was the internet. So you had to find people like either by reading about them or going to food shows. And I think I met her at a food show, but it would have been brief. And then I went on a trip to Italy, which Grace, I don't even know if you know, but included like Martelli, Boldi, Pecorino Romano, Parmigiano Reggiano, the Cavalli brothers, etc. So anyway, she produces olive oil on her family's farm. Today, great olive oil has become much more the norm, but at that time, there was still a lot of old farms that were just selling off their oil into mass market, and whether the oil was good or not good didn't really matter that much because it was getting lumped in with a whole bunch of other farms. And so it was quite an innovative move at the time to pull up your oil out of there. It was more work because you had to do all the marketing and the labeling and all of that. But Marina took it on. She's very down to earth. At the time, one of the few women doing that work. There are now happily many more. But she was quite the maverick in the world. And I wouldn't have really known this, but my friend, when I was in Italy, when I was talking about him driven to visit Marina, and they're like, you know who that is? Right? I'm like, oh, I don't know. They're like, Colonna Plaza at Rome. That's her family from 2,000 years ago or whatever. So she's quite a personality. This oil is where we asked her for us to pick out one of the olives that she uses in her typical blend, the Parenzana. I like that oil. We taste it, and we picked that one of all the different varietals, and it's been working really well. Going up from there, the Roadhouse Bread. This is a shout out to Jan Longoni, who If we're in history, Paul, when we opened back then, Paul told me about this woman who in her basement on Madison had this amazing cookbook collection. And again, this is long before the web, so you couldn't just go on your phone while you were waiting for your table at a restaurant and order some rare book. You had to find it, and you had to find somebody who had found it for you before that. So when we were getting ready to open the Roadhouse, which was the year of 2003, with the bakehouse, we wanted to do a bread that was true to American tradition, because that was who we were going to do. And we ended up calling it Roadhouse Bread. Frank was there along with Sheldon doing the work on it. And we wanted a bread that was different than what we already had, but that would be true as all our food is to traditional food. So the old recipes for this were called Ryan Indian bread or 30 bread. It was a mix of, it was and is a mix of rye, wheat, and corn. The wheat is what people from Europe who were coming to North America wanted it always. That was what was most highly prized, but it doesn't grow very well in the cold climate of New England. And eventually they succumbed to reality and started to grow rye, which grows better in northern climates, and then also to corn, which of course was the indigenous product that was already here. And this, like so many of the amazing breads from the bakehouse, is a natural sour starter. So 8 hours of rise time, and it's been one of my favorite breads. So happy to have it. And last but not least, pimento cheese. So it's funny how much the world changes, not because of pandemics, but so I never knew anything about pimento cheese. Anybody from the South? Wow.
We got one.
Okay, so I'm from the south side of Chicago, but we didn't know anything about pimento cheese. I knew nothing about pimento cheese. I really never went to the South in my life until we were getting ready to open the Roadhouse, and then we went down to Southern Foodways Alliance Symposium in Oxford, Mississippi, and that really changed the whole bunch of my belief about the South and understanding culture and all the issues from race to cooking to everything that happens all over the world, but in particular about that part of the world. So one of the things I learned about was pimento cheese, and I learned about it by embarrassing myself because it was, you know, coming from Chicago, I just thought pimento cheese, it's like that stuff in the bottle and it's pasteurized, and you know, and I kind of, it was on the menu, and I, not very loudly, but I said something, and I got jumped on by this entire table, not physically, and that's how I learned about pimento cheese. And so what I came to understand is that pimento cheese in the South, which is often called pimento cheese, is seemingly appreciated across all lines that typically can divide people. So people of all races, all classes, all ethnicities, all income levels, everybody I met seemed to have a family recipe or their neighbor's family recipe for pimento cheese. So having tasted 100 or whatever different ones, this is the one that I made. And now, 12 years later, it's become a Zingerman staple, which is how food ways move. There you go. Grace?
Sorry. Thank you. We're going to turn it over to you. The one thing I will say before I turn it over to Micki is that we have 4 folks here. Can you hear me? How about now? There we go. We have 4 folks here helping out. We just wanted to quickly introduce them. So we have Jen, Emily, Rob, and Liliana. If you need anything during the night, please don't hesitate. They're happy to fill up your coffee, get you something else to drink, get your refill. So thanks, folks, for being here.
Can you all hear me in the back? You good? Okay, great. So besides the people from Zingerman's, the most important person in the room I would like to introduce, my literary agent, Irene Goodman. Stand up, Irene. The reason there is a book is because it was Irene's idea. I will tell you the story very quickly. Over Thanksgiving of 2019, I was checking an email account that I don't look at very often, but which is on my website. And I had an email from Irene Goodman, literary agent, proposing that I do a book on Zingerman's. And at first I thought, It's like those emails you get from the prince offering you $20 million. They're not sure whether it's legitimate. Well, Irene is a very legitimate literary agent who has represented some of the biggest names in the literary world. We started to correspond. I kind of talked to Ari and said, if I wrote a book about Zingermans, would you all cooperate? And he said, why not? So one thing led to another, and Irene made some plans to come out and visit, and we decided we'd have a conference call with the folks from Scribner's who are very interested in buying the book. And the conference call happened to be scheduled for Monday, March 16th, 2020. Well, that was the day that Governor Whitmer announced the stay-at-home order and the indoor dining was closed. And Ari came to the meeting, the virtual meeting, and said, this is the worst day of my life. I've just had to lay off 300 people. So the book that I was planning to write is about 8 of the first chapters in the book. And then we added a chapter just on Zingerman's innovation during the pandemic. And then I'll look at the future, and also, as you'll see, the vision for 2032 is in there. It was interesting because the vision was almost finished when all this happened. And I don't think it was significantly changed from what Zingerman's was thinking about. So that's just a little explanation of how the book came to be. I'm so grateful that Irene had the idea. She's a Zingerman's fan and went to the University of Michigan. So I think all the stars aligned. So I've been doing a lot of interviews. I don't know if people have heard me on NPR or seen me on TV, and it's been just wonderful to have Zingerman's cooperation in this project. And I have to say that the one question everybody asks me is, how did Ari and Paul meet? So I would like to ask you both that question.
So how many of you remember Maud's restaurant here in Ann Arbor? Okay, so I had been working at the Real Seafood Company. I was a bartender, then a bar manager, and then a kitchen manager. And Maud's had opened, and they lost their general manager, and I was had the opportunity to go down there and be the general manager. And on my first day there, I think it was Ari's first day as a dishwasher, and they had a little office that was in a loft up a spiral staircase, and it was a mess. And so he was the lowest person on the totem pole. So I asked him if he would help me organize the office. And so we were up there spending a few hours together and talking. And Ari had grown up in Chicago, and I grew up in Detroit. And, you know, in our neighborhoods, there was a delicatessen. We lamented about how there wasn't any in Ann Arbor. You couldn't really find a real corned beef sandwich on real rye bread. We just started talking about, you know, Ann Arbor could use a good delicatessen. We had we talked about music, we talked about drugs, and that's how the friendship started.
That's all accurate. I don't remember that much what we talked about, but the rest is accurate. But yes, it was my first day. Mitch Cheney hired me. I'm 38 now. But anyway, yes, that's how we met. So I guess in hindsight, there's many lessons from that, but one is just, you know, kudos to Paul, because a typical restaurant general manager would not engage in a meaningful conversation with a dishwasher. It's just not what would happen. And I think that underlies so much of what goes on here still to this day. It's just the whole idea of treating everybody with dignity. It doesn't matter who they are and where they came from. I think just having first conversation. So started there. 4 years.
4 years.
Here's the not true story, and that's commonly told. We went to college together, not true. In our dorm room that we shared, not true. We would talk a lot about opening a deli together, and then when we graduated, we opened, not true. So Paul had, by the time we opened, I don't know, what, 7 years of experience, 9 years, and I had 4. So starting with the basics and all the things that aren't glamorous, like laying on the floor on a sheet tray, cleaning under the grill, and cleaning the hoods, and all that, cleaning dumpsters and things that are still important.
So one of the things that I've noticed in reading, 50 management books is how important relationships. And you don't always get along with everybody. And I would love to know what each of you saw in each other as a business partner. And was there anything about the other one that drove you out of your minds?
I don't think it, honestly, it's not that different than any other long-term relationship. And in the beginning, it was, I think, an intuitive or not always fully spoken set of shared values and vision. And over time, it's like all long-term relationships, it's learning to work together and me changing, Paul changing, and each of us growing to adapt to the other's needs, and at the same time holding true to things that, for him, what's core to him, and for me, what's core to me, and the shared vision and values are always, it's hard to do well without them. I guess if I can remember the exact words you used in your question, I don't think anybody gets along with anybody all the time. And so it's really, as Paul taught me early on, it's professionalism is learning to go on long after the initial glamour wears off. And so a business partnership has a honeymoon stage, just like a personal relationship, but it's really what comes after that. And then I think I'll hand it over to Paul, but just, we've always had this thing informally and then became formal and written down. It's just coming back to the table till we can figure it out. Of course, it's not always easy, but here we are, happily still working together.
I believe a relationship is like any living thing. It can deal with a lot of stress. What it can't deal with is neglect. And so, like Ari said, it's important to continue to come back to the table and keep talking. I don't think there's anything that impacts the probability of success of a business more than the quality of a relationship, because if the relationship is working well, you can make some pretty big strategic errors, which we certainly have over the years. But if the relationship works, then you can quickly pivot and change course and do the work that you need to do in order to successfully move forward. So, that's it. You have to. But also, I think in my experience, in our colleagues around the country, it's not when things get tough where partnerships start to break down. I think it's more often when things are successful and one partner thinks they were contributing more than the other, that can destroy a relationship more quickly than when there's a crisis. Because when there's a crisis, most people worth their salt are going to dig in and do what they have to do. It's when things are riding high that you still have to really appreciate and respect what the other person is bringing. You have to be pretty honest with each other about what your strengths and weaknesses are. I think it's a lot. I don't know if any of you played tennis, but I played a lot of doubles, And in doubles, if you're gonna be successful, you've gotta be pretty honest with each other about, you know, I'm better at the volleys, so when it's short, I'm gonna run up, you're faster. If they're lobbing us, you're gonna run back. And so you really need to be honest with each other about that and kind of move toward, as you divide the responsibilities and the work up, what your strengths and weaknesses are. So I think that's what helped me at work.
Ari was talking about the misconceptions about Zingerman's. And one of the misconceptions, I think, is that you guys were successful from day one. From what I can tell, it took 4 to 6 years about for things to settle out and go into the black. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I don't remember what year we became profitable, but I think we were in the beginning, but it's so subjective because if you're paying yourself, like Paul wasn't getting paid at all because he was living on his salary right from the fish market. And I would think I was getting $200 a week, which was like enough to cover my car payment and my rent. Well, I mean, so, you know, if you start with a big salary and then breaking even is more challenging, whatever. So anyway, but I don't know. I don't really think of us as a success, and I don't think of us as a failure either. I just think we are and exist, and we try to get better every day. And I don't, for me, and I'm not dismissing the question, I guess I just don't think of it first. Like every day I get up and try to do something better and figure out what I could have done better yesterday and keep going. And I've never felt like hit that plateau where it was all awesome. And even the people who do usually, Paul said, trouble comes quickly thereafter.
So, do people remember Jacobson's?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, good. Okay. So that was my first job. I started as a gift wrapper during Christmas season. We started on what's now known as Black Friday. We didn't have the term then. And then you worked right straight through Christmas Eve. And apparently I was good enough as a high school gift wrapper to be invited back to become a saleswoman. And my training as a saleswoman was as follows. I had to be bonded, and it's actually the only job where I've ever been bonded. They did a background check on me, and I guess I hadn't, turned over a car or set anything on fire. And then I was given a sales book, and we used to have these brown leather sales book, and you actually still wrote sales tickets then, and they showed me how to do a charge card. They showed me what to do if I saw somebody shoplift. And then they just turned me loose out on the sales floor and said, ask your colleagues if you have any questions. Some of my colleagues have pretty sharp elbows, but others were very kind and I'm still friendly with them. But I want to bring that over to Grace because I have a feeling that isn't how people who work in the deli are trained. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about a basic deli employee, whether it's a sandwich person or a deli case person or a cashier. What is the training comp?
Thanks, Micki. Hopefully they're not trained that way. Most of the time we succeed. We have a training passport that, from my understanding, when you guys had a few employees, you realized that, we actually do need to train people. I think it was the story that Ari didn't really want to have to train people at that time. No?
Paul and I dreamed it up in our dorm room.
Is that one of those other fiction things?
Well, I could tell them what happened.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
So it came from Maggie Bayless, who, like Frank, worked at Mods with us, and it happened after Singleton started. So she created this format that shared responsibility. So that's where it came from. But it is a, whatever, 6 months in when I said this is great, not to write anything down. That's also true. But that was like 13 years before the training passport began.
So the training passport, each staff member gets a passport that we have some agreed upon things that everyone that works at Zingerman's, we want them to know, right? So they all learn about the training contact. And the thing to me about the training contact that I love is there's two sides to it. So we define what we're going to do as trainers, which is provide the information in a format and recognize and reward performance. And then we also define what it means to be a trainee, which means that you need to take responsibility for the effectiveness of your training. And we talk about that and what that means, because for each person, it might be a little bit different. Some roles you might need to practice, some roles you need to have a lot of memorization to know all those sandwiches and all those ingredients. Lots of little flashcards come out. So there's that happens, and that is really, I think, the key to our training is that we talk about the responsibility lies on both sides. That if both sides aren't committed to the training, it's not going to happen. If I come in and I'm a new employee and I don't have any interest in learning, I'm not going to get very far. And if I'm a trainer and I don't have any interest in training, we're not going to get very far. We have some agreed upon classes that we want everyone to take. So there's night safety because we want everyone to be safe. We're going to have a service class. We give them information about just the history of Zingerman's community of businesses and knowing that Deli opened and kind of our story. Because we say that everyone that walks in the door assumes that you know all of the 40 years of history. And so we want to give you enough footing that you can talk about that. And then we put specifics in there for each department. So if you're working in specialty foods, you might need to know the top 3 best-selling cheeses and how to work the bread sense.
What are the top?
Oh, let's say today they are. We sell a lot of the nor'easter cheddar, so the little wax bars of cheddar that we're getting from Vermont, which are just delicious. We sell a lot of Stilton or Singleton. So Singleton is a raw milk version of Stilton we're getting from the Ozark Dairy. And Parmesan Reggiano is up very much. It's dropped a little bit. I think some other ones picked up, but Parmesan Reggiano, probably the Mortadella, the farm that we have with the woman cheese maker is probably the biggest seller right now.
So when I worked at Jacobson's, I knew nothing about their finances. I only remember that it was privately held at that point. And they did end up going bankrupt, and that's one of the reasons why there's no more Jacobson's. But here at Zingerman's, there's something called open book management, where in your business unit, you have a right to see the data on what's happening in your part of the business. And you have a right to see some of the information across the whole company. Why would you guys do that?
So
Dorm room.
back in the dorm room. So, well, a couple things. When we opened, we wanted an organization where decisions were not made based on who had the most authority, but rather who had a good idea, who had information that was relevant to an issue we were dealing with. We had both come up from the bottom, and we have this belief that the folks that are closest to the work, closest to the customers, knew what all the problems were and probably knew what to do about them. And the people at the top had historical information about what was going right or what was going wrong. It didn't think the people down at the bottom cared that much or were smart enough to deal with what was going on. And so we wanted to change that. We didn't really know how, and we stumbled with it for a long time. And eventually we came across a book called The Great Game of Business, which gave us a roadmap for how to deal with this. So, but, if you're asking an employee to help a business be profitable, it kind of makes sense that you have to give them all the information in order for them to make decisions, because they're making, if not dozens, hundreds of decisions a day. And if you want to kind of have a shot at making the right decision, they need the information. So when you talk about open book management, most folks think it's that all the financial information is available. And that's certainly true, but that's just part of it. Open book management is inviting everybody to come in and help make the decisions that run the business. It's getting everyone to believe and understand that they are personally responsible for the success of the business. And it also is a way to share the stress. of running the business in appropriate ways with everybody that's there. And really that was the driving force for it. Just a much, for us, just a much better way of being in the world.
So, Zingerman's is a place where you can start as a server, you can start as someone who takes orders at the cheese counter, and you can rise and become what's called a managing partner in that business. And I would love to hear Grace talk about what that takes. What do you actually learn in the path to partnership, and how do you think that has helped you as a managing partner for that?
Well, the path to partnership is, it's a great process. It's very self-led by whoever wants to be the partner. So over the years, even since when I first became a partner, which is about 16 and a half or so years ago, we've refined the process a little bit more, made it a little bit more clear and transparent of what the steps are. But when it comes down to it, you need to have an idea and a vision of what you want to either bring to the business. So I came in as someone who wanted to be a partner in the existing business. So there has to be an opening for that. And I need to have a vision of what I wanted to achieve at the deli and what I thought the future years were going to bring. If you're in a different situation, you're opening a new business, you need to have a vision for what that is. And then there's, you need to know Zingerman. So part of it is we've had some people come in who didn't work at Zingerman's and wanted to open a business with us. And we asked them to come and work in some of the businesses so that they could get a sense of what our culture is. That's a big piece of understanding working here. When I first got hired at Zingerman's, I've been in the restaurant industry 16 or 17 years, and I had a lot of experience doing different things. But the values and the style of working, to me, like I read the staff guide cover to cover before I even went on my interview, and I was like, wow, this sounds like an amazing place to be. And then when I got hired, I spent the first year waiting for the bottom to fall out, because I'd worked for a lot of really good companies. But I'd also seen when you got to this point where there was a lot of money involved, or there was some difficult decision, and often it felt like the people at the top kind of said there was this gray area, and those values don't really apply. And I really did spend the first year like waiting for that to happen, for something to come up where, oh, that doesn't really apply here, we're going to go for the profit decision. And that never happened. So for me, that was a big decision for me to go forward. I had been on a path to opening my own restaurant before I came to work here. The place I was at got sold out and bought by a big publicly traded corporation, so it wasn't a good fit. And then after being here a year, I felt like there was such great integrity and such a great group of people. It's a hard path to be an owner. There's a lot of work involved, and there's a lot of risk involved, and you're leading a group of people. But at Zingerman's, you also have this group of partners to help you who have a much greater scope of experience. And so when things get hard, you have people to reach out to and assist you.
So I don't know if you all know, there's a bench out in front of the deli that is part of the Zingerman story. And the misconception about that bench is that one day Paul and Ari went and sat on the bench and decided the future of Zingerman. It was that easy. So tell us why it wasn't that easy and what went into the conversation you had about creating the Zingerman's community.
The bench was in our dorm room. Well, the conversation started there. It just took a year, which is true of most things that are meaningful and good. This is one of the many things that I've learned over the years that, to Paul's point about relationships, it's not about the first time you get together. It's fun to have a conversation. It's how you deal with, like you said, good things, how you deal with challenging things. To tell it better because he's the one who asked this question about where we would be in 10 years. That intuitive sense that I've come to describe as, that we were an organization midlife or whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's sort of like we had achieved this unwritten but inspiring vision that we had in our heads when in our conversations when we opened in 1982, when we had done it, and I didn't have that sense at all. Not that I thought we were done, but it's just there's always so much to do every day. Okay, so this was getting outside of the day-to-day challenges on his part and challenging me and maybe himself at the same time to say, where do we want to be? And I certainly didn't know. And it's not like we were satisfied, because long before there was a Toyota way, we've always been about getting better every day. But I've come to understand over all of these decades, there's a big difference between improving what you have and going after something inspiring. And I wasn't really ready to come up with that, but this is where diversity in the conversation can help. So you can tell it better on his end than hopefully, but that's where it started. And then it was a long year of trying to figure out the answers. And I guess the last thing I'll say is it's like you could live in it. I don't know if you've ever lived with somebody and then you move to a new location. Anybody done that? Nobody?
Yeah.
Okay, these are real questions. So it's like you could live in the same house or apartment for 10 years and you never talk about the couch. And then when you move, like you get in these giant arguments about where the couch should go, because all of a sudden everything's back on the table again, and what you took for granted for whatever 10 years is now controversial. And so when Paul asked that question, then all of a sudden it wasn't just how do we fix what's broken now and how do we make this a little bit better, but if we could do anything, which isn't the way I was used to thinking at that time, what do we want to do?
There was a couple other things that were going on at that time. We had been mired in a lawsuit with a copycat, a company that was kind of copying what we were doing. And although there's legal protections on that, there's the Lanham Act of 1942, and you're entitled to protection on the innovations that you've made. And in the restaurant, it's called trade dress, the way you look, your look and feel, and your order sequence, many different things. But it's not a criminal offense. It's not like if somebody's doing it, the police are going to go in and arrest somebody. And so we got caught up in that. For any of you, if you have been in a lawsuit, you'll understand that no matter how right you feel, how justified you are in your actions, everything you're doing is in a negative pursuit. There's nothing about it that's enhancing your life, the lives that work for you, or the lives of the community that supports you. And so while this was going on, I just started questioning what we were doing, and I realized, to me, it felt like, we had opened, and when we first opened, people would come and go, "Oh, you guys are so lucky, you don't have any competition." And I go, "You're crazy, we compete with every stop and go that sells a hot dog." But I knew it wasn't quite true. There was some little bit of magic that we had, but people aren't stupid, and they see what you're doing, and they see a line out the door, and they know what parts of your business are profitable and what parts aren't, and so they can go and copy you, and they can offer about 45% of the quality for 70% of the price, and it makes you look like you're raping the public. And I thought that we had become complacent, and we thought we owned our market, and that just wasn't true. And we needed to figure out, how do we serve that market better? How do we hold on to it? And so I dragged Ari outside, and we sat down on the bench, and I said, "Hey, we've been at this for almost 10 years. 10 years from now, what do we look like?" And I was like, "Why are you bothering? I got work to do." And I was like, "Well, this actually is our work." And goes, "No, the lunch rush is going to start. And, things are falling apart. But when you're leading a business, you want the folks that work for you to continue to come to work and put out great effort. You all almost, people come in and they show up every day and they work really hard. And that's a gift that they give you. That's the gift the followers give. And in return, we owe them a debt. Part of that debt is to provide a workplace where they feel safe and they feel really good about coming and putting that effort out. Part of it is a legacy of guiding principles that says this is going to be the reality within this workplace without exception. And a really big part of it, I learned, is a hopeful, inclusive, positive vision of the future that says this is where we're going. It's going to be really great, and you can be part of this. In fact, you can decide what role you want to play in this. And so that's what I was pushing my partner at that time to kind of try to get it out of my head and into his head. And so that started a conversation that took us about a year, and of going back and forth and always coming back to the table when, you know, maybe you wanted to jump across the table and choke the other person. But we worked through it, and what came out of that was our first long-term vision, with a 15-year vision that we came out with in 1994. They called it Zingerman's 2009, and it kind of laid out what we wanted to do. And a big part of that was we wanted to share ownership as deeply and as widely into the organization. That's kind of how it
You can see there's food coming. So we're gonna keep chatting and we're gonna serve some delicious food. You want to talk about what we're getting? Okay, we'll wait until you all get served and then we'll talk about what you're getting. But I wanted to talk about a term called vertical integration. And I wonder if people know what that means. Any automotive people in this room? Okay, so I don't see like the whole room hands going up, so I'll just explain what it means. So vertical integration. So forgive me, but I covered the automobile and the airline industry for a long time. So I know some of these manufacturing terms. Vertical integration means that you make a portion of what you sell. The part for cars, it's the parts that go into them are made by your subsidiaries and then assembled. So if you think about it, Ford Motor Company, the big Rouge plant, they made about half of the parts in their cars at the Rouge. Those big freighters would come down from up north and bring coal, and then there would be steel, and then there would be glass and all that. So when I was doing my research on Zingerman, it just occurred to me that Zingerman has a degree of vertical integration. And it's not automotive, obviously, but it is a fact that Zingerman's does produce a portion of what goes into a product that you get from Zingerman's. So I wanted Grace to talk about what it means that she doesn't have to order bread from somebody else, and she doesn't have to get somebody else to make the green cheese, and that the corned beef is cured right here. What difference does it make to you, someone running a business, that you don't have to go outside to look for all this?
Well, it's an interesting thing. We all are Zingerman's businesses and we all work together, but they're also by themselves from each other. So I don't, although it may seem like it's a given that they go out and that's a name, and they make amazing bread. If for some reason I wanted to bring in something else, we would have a conversation. That the bakehouse came about, bake bread, better bread for the fellow. Not to be, my understanding is not to be a wholesaler, but just to make better bread than we were able to buy. The early bread chips are quite a story. I wasn't here at that time, but driving, quite a long distance every day to get the best bread they could find, that wasn't being delivered here. Quite a thing. But there is still, we sell lots of other cheeses besides just Zingerman's Creamery cheese. So we buy the things that Zingerman's Creamery makes because they're exceptional quality. And I think that's the piece that makes it pretty special, is that we have a group of producers who share the same values and the same vision we have of the quality of products, that you really can taste the difference. That we're making full flavor, traditionally made good foods. And we work together as business partners, just like I was working with any other vendor, but we have a much closer relationship. So we can sit together and taste together. We can talk about what we need for our future holidays and give a better level of forecasting and help each other be successful, and also develop products together. That's a lot of fun. It's like, okay, well, we really think that this could be something that we could sell. How can we make something special? Let me test it out here in a safe place, and then eventually grow it out to be another product that you can wholesale somewhere else. We want to kind of have an innovation, and just a really good partnership.
I'm sure you had offers to satellite your business to other cities.
So for those of you who can't hear the question, this lady was asking why Zingerman is local to Ann Arbor and why there aren't multiple delis and other Zingerman businesses around the country. So you gentlemen can give us the answer.
Well, from the beginning, we really wanted a place that was very special. So we didn't want to create something that was just a replica of what was out there everywhere else. And with the thing about it, for me, it's still true to this day. I mean, the places that I like to go, there's one. If you're on, I've been on the Ohio Turnpike, and if you got to go to the bathroom, Starbucks, or you're falling asleep, is awesome. But I don't think anybody walks in here and this is mind blowing. What a memorable. And the places that, whatever, Cow Pep or Frontier Grill in Chicago or whatever, Suki Cafe, I mean, the places that I'm drawn to are the ones that were really special. And I guess for me, this was the greatest thing about staying true to that, which is it is going against what most people do. Not how you do it. Kind of work that feels good to me. But I like to work hard, but I don't like to work hard and stuff I don't believe in. And for me, that's a big driver. And I don't know when, it was a couple of years ago, maybe it was right before the pandemic, and I was sitting out on the same bench with some reporter who was interviewing me, asking me the same question, because it was a common question. And of course, the same thing that happens all day, every day, there's some guy backing up across Detroit Street with his friends posing in front of the deli and he's taking their picture. And I was like, here's your answer. Like if there's 100 of these, they're not going to be standing in traffic risking their lives to take a picture because it doesn't really matter. And I still think it's really important in the same way that great musicians or great artists, like there's people who sell more, but what they produce is not as special. And for me, that is a big driver. So for me, that's
Well, I also think that in the beginning, I don't know if Ari and I are like true entrepreneurs where you identify a market need and then you go fill that market need and you do it over and over again. In the beginning, I think that we kind of imagined a life that we wanted to live and tried to build a business that would allow us to live that life, which was to be rooted in the community, to have something very, very special and unique, and by definition, that there was only one. And at that time, I don't think we had ever seen a business that was really wonderful and then went on and grew by repetition and actually got better. Always seen the quality specialness, to lose whatever magic. That's really what we want to avoid.
Yeah, totally. And the thing I'll add that I didn't understand in the beginning when we opened, but I feel strongly about now, is just, so in the wine world or the food world, in French, there's a term called terroir, right? Which means that the soil impacts what grows in it, that the flavor of the same, if you fly some grapevines from the south of France to California, you might produce equally interesting wine, but it'll be different because the soil is different. And so for me, it's just really important to be of the community. What we are is very much informed by this. And hopefully, if we've done our job well over whatever years, then the community is equally informed by us. And I couldn't have explained this in the same way 4 years ago, but there's a Chilean biologist, Humberto Maturana, who passed away 2 years ago in May. But his work is super interesting. It's hard for me to read, but excuse me, he says that it's actually, he's a scientist. He says it's impossible to actually assess something in isolation because everything is being impacted by everything else. And so who we are, we would not be here the way we are if we weren't in a different town. It doesn't mean it wouldn't be really good, it just would be different.
So who's taken a class at Zingerman? Okay. Looks like a lot of people. So I guess we can count this as a class. So I've been taking classes at least for 20 years at Zingerman. I've taken the pie class where I cried because I don't have the dexterity. For whatever reason, now I did get pies out of the pie class, but there were tears. I've taken the mozzarella class, which I think is bad. I think the mozzarella class is being taught again. I've taken the class in Great American Cookies, which actually led to a story that I did in the New York Times about whoopie pies, which was featured on The View when Barbara Walters was still at The View. So I was pretty proud of that one. I've taken flatbreads. I've taken olive oil and vinegar. I took a coffee class that I think we thought would never end. It was not recently, it was a few years ago. But what I wanted to ask all of you, Grace actually taught one of my favorite classes, which is in the book, which was the Parmigiano Reggiano class, where we all looked at the giant wheel of Parmesan that's as big as a coffee table, and we're holding our breath while they were opening it. So I want to ask all of you about the teaching mission of Zingerman's, because I went to Paris and went to cooking school with Patricia Wells, and when she was circling our classroom, she stopped behind me and said, "You can cook." And I owe it all to these guys. I mean, I eventually did go to the Corner Deli, but I hadn't at that point. So I would love to hear why teaching these classes is such an integral part of it.
When we first opened, and we were this tiny little building here, we were never going to be able to compete on price. And so our marketing thrust was going to be on providing an experience. And that was going to that we were going to teach you about the food and about the products. And we specifically would pick products that we believed in, that had integrity, that there was a history behind it, there was a good story to tell. We really thought that that's what was going to be able to differentiate us in the marketplace. And it was also what we love to do. Ari and I really didn't know a lot about business. I think we were good managers of the frontline staff, and we knew how to get a crew going and produce a high quality product on a consistent basis. but we were both voracious readers. And we liked learning, and so we kind of felt everybody else would too. I don't know what really got going down in the company. We believe that everybody would be able to tell the difference between a really high quality product and one that wasn't that good. And you did not need an educated palate. You needed to taste it and you needed to know a little bit about it. And that's kind of what we at the farm.
All true. Justin Krusty from American Spoon Foods, I've known for almost as long as we've been open. I have this, I just told this story the other day. I have this vivid memory of when we started selling their jams, which is still, their strawberry preserves, is still one of my favorite things that we have. And, you know, he was an actor up in Detroit, up north, foraging in the woods for his friend Larry Fortune restaurant. And anyway, they started to make jam and copper kettles up at Petoskey around the time we opened beer maybe a year before. Anyway, but he just pointed out, you know, what's super obvious in hindsight. He's like, okay, if you sell our jam and it's 60% fruit, all hand-picked with cane sugar, and then you put another jar of jam, much more readily available, and it's 35% fruit with a lot of pectin from the outside, they look exactly the same, right? And the label can even be fancier, but the one with 60% hand-picked fruit by definition is going to cost way, way more. And instead of you don't tell people why there's a difference, then they're going to buy the cheaper one. And of course, that's obvious and true. And to Paul's point, we've always based everything on the intelligence of human beings. So the work in the leadership was based on the belief that people that we partnered with, some of them are here tonight, hired, were smart, and they understood as much as we did, maybe different things, but they understood as much as we were about business. So that's what Open Book is. And then the belief in the standard belief when we opened in the food business was customers were kind of dumb and they couldn't tell the difference between a really great product and people would, the wisdom was people won't pay. And we just turned it around. We're like, no, people will pay, but you have to help them understand what the difference is, because nobody wants to spend more money. It's just, if there's a difference in quality, then people often will pay, and if they choose not to, that's okay too. I don't disrespect them. They're making a conscious, educated choice. And then two things took us up a lot in the training, in the classes. So Zing Train started in '94, and then Bake, Amy's at Frank 12 years. 15, 16 years. So both of those really, really raised the bar for what we were doing. Bake with obviously baking, and then a little bit of cooking. And now people come from all over the world for that and or log on. One of the 22 only good things of the pandemic. Sure that, and the same for Zingerman, because those classes that Maggie created and Frank and he created that Bake really exposed us to a whole.
Well, I'll also say that, you know, one of our favorite things around here is to talk about food. So that's one of our favorite things to do, is to have these classes. We can give you snippets of information on the floor when you come in, and we talk about the fact that you really can taste the difference. I think we've all had the experience of buying something off the shelf that looked really pretty, and you got home and you were disappointed. So we don't ever want to have that happen here. Our conversations with you when we're just selling you product are short. And we love to really have these long conversations. We like to find out a lot about the products during the day when people are working side by side. They're talking about the different producers and they're tasting, and they're having all these conversations, and it allows us to share much more depth of information. The Parmigiano Reggiano tasting that Micki referred to, Ari and I had an opportunity. We had a Parmigiano Reggiano producer that we used for many, many, many years. And then it turned out that we weren't going to be able to get that product anymore. It wasn't going to be able to be available to be imported. And so we both were talking about, like, what are we going to do? We got to figure out how to do this. So we worked together We went with the consortium for Parmigiano Reggiano, and we went on a couple of tours of Italy. We got to visit, I don't know, I think we visited 15 or 16 different producers, tasted through, and all of Parmigiano Reggiano was great, but some of them were greater than others. So we were lucky enough to find 4 different producers we really loved. We ended up bringing back 3 of those producers' product into the U.S. And so one of the dinners we had was featuring those different producers, talking about how many different farms there are in the Parmigiano Reggiano group, and why the different ones that we brought in were special. One was from the mountains, one was from the plains. We talked about processes. They're all following the exact same recipe, but allow us to share the very special differences that each of the different people have. And that's a blast for us. And if you all come and join us and like to taste with us, it makes us super happy.
So I see Reuben's arriving. Are you guys looking for like the veggie apple or?
Just a little bit about the food. We really wanted to serve some of the classics that we have. So we brought out a farmer's market salad, just a classic green salad with a balsamic vinaigrette. I guess one thing, it might be obvious, but I just want to point out that we do make everything here in the deli kitchen. So that was one of the things that I was also a little impressed with when I first started here, because the kitchen was so much smaller than was like a closet compared to what we have now. And you know, they boiled all the corned beef and they cooked all the potatoes and they did all the cutting and the slicing and the mixing, and they didn't buy even like chicken salad. Most restaurants I was at would just buy frozen cooked chicken meat. No, we roasted whole birds and cut them down and did all that. We still do. And so it's a real departure from what you see in a lot of restaurants. We've very much done everything by hand, and we're buying a lot of things from people that we know and love that we've worked with for a long time. So farmer's market salad with the balsamic vinaigrette, there's a little bit of Parmigiano Reggiano in that dressing. We are using the Vecchia balsamic vinegar, the same one that you can buy on the shelves. We're using the 3-year, so it's not as aged as much, but it is still the same vinegar. We have the old-fashioned potato salad, my favorite potato salad. We sell lots of potatoes. Roger, my partner, who's the chef, also will joke about Potato Nation because there's so many different versions of potatoes that we sell. Whether it's the Zingerman's potato salad with the roasted red pepper sauce, or the Swiss potato salad, or latkes, right? There's potatoes of old-fashioned. The old-fashioned is a traditional mustard in the dressing. Has a little egg in there and has carrot in there. We have our coleslaw. So just a really classic coleslaw, and then garden party salad. We did special for Micki. It's one of her favorites. It isn't a salad that we've offered in a while. We can probably see it in the case tomorrow. It is bonsai pasta with some fresh sprouts and some Parmigiano Reggiano on it, and a little olive oil and pepper. Then of course we have the Reuben. So we have the classic Zingerman's Reuben, the number 2, and then we have the 236, which is Rutgers Raucous Reuben, which is the brinery tempeh. Thankfully, the brinery is using tempeh again, so we're taking that and we're soaking that in beef juice and then grilling that up. The classic Zingerman's Reuben is a pretty great story, and I like to talk about that. It's a story I actually teach when I teach the Welcome to the Deli class, the Deli Day 1. I talk about all of our guiding principles, and I talk about our relationships and how when I first started working here, what most surprised me was our relationships with our vendors. Because I had worked at other restaurants, and essentially you would have 3 different produce vendors, and you would get prices from each of them, and you would buy your carrots from one, and your cabbage from one, and your potatoes from the other, and you pit them against each other, try to get better pricing, right? So when I came here, I was talking to people who were working here, and you know, the thing we buy more of and spend more money on than anything else is corned beef. We're known for our corned beef. We sell thousands and thousands of sandwiches. I said, where are you getting your corned beef from? Where do you get pork from? Like, oh, we get it all from Cy, United Meat and Go. And I was like, what do you mean? I had the chance to meet Cy, and Cy told it when he first started delivering here because Colin knew Cy and really wanted to use his corned beef. And they didn't deliver it to Ann Arbor. And so Cy would load the corned beef in the back of the station wagon, make his delivery, and then he would also stay through lunch and talk to them about how best to make and slice and prepare corned beef so that it was the best quality that we could make it. As Cy would tell it, he's a character, I taught those boys how to make a sandwich. And we did. And so many years later, when myself and my business partner Rick started, we were still using size corned beef, because he does an amazing job, but we were really looking to make the turkey that we sold better. Because we were using Butterball turkey, that's really all there was in the market. We kept getting samples of different turkeys to sell, because we sell a lot of turkey as well on sandwiches, and we just couldn't find one that was any good. So Rick, my partner, went to Cy and said, hey, would you ever make turkey, or do you have a lead on turkey? Well, they can't do turkey at a corned beef place, but Cy's like, well, I know a guy who has a turkey processing plant. So they spent about 2 years working on a recipe on how to make really great roasted turkey. And so after 2 years, we had a way better product than we'd ever had before. And Cy had another wholesale line he could sell to others. And it's much more about having this partnership and working together and finding a way to make it a win-win than pitting the vendors against each other. So I'm just really proud of that part of it, and also that we still work with Cy, and now his prodigy Scott helps us a lot, and they take really good care of us. The ribbon, of course, is on our Jewish rye bread. It's a seedless rye made by the bakehouse, double baked, Russian dressing, real Swiss Emmental cheese, sauerkraut from the brinery, all grilled. We closed at 7, so the sandwich line stayed a little bit late and made all the sandwiches fresh right before they left, so you can have them hot off the grill. So I hope you enjoy it.
So I have to say that, I have to say that Cy was one of my favorite interviews for the book. You can read the corned beef story in the book. Cy and I have become email friends. He actually lives in Florida, I believe. Yeah. But he said someday he'll be back and he wants to meet me, and I look forward to meeting him as well. I want to talk about the pandemic, and I don't want to talk about it as a terrible thing, because from my perspective, it was an opportunity for Zingerman's to innovate, and probably in some surprising ways. If you walk through the deli now, it's starting to look more like the old deli, although it may never be completely the old deli. But I want to dial back and have both Ari and Paul talk a little bit about the challenges that they face right at the beginning, because I was actually at the Roadhouse on Sunday, March 15th, and I would say it was me and maybe 4 other tables, because by then everybody knew that shutdown was coming. But how did that hit you? Maybe Ari, you want to start?
Was there a pandemic? Well, it seems like about 100 years ago now, but it's 2 years ago this week. So for our 38th anniversary, we got a pandemic. This year is going way better so far. Well, it was horrible. I mean, for everybody, you know, now I would say most humans have, for better and for worse, somewhat settled into the realities of it. And at the time, rewind your brain. No one seemed to know, at least no one seemed to know what was going on at any level. There was a lot of information flying around and a ton of uncertainty. And without getting into politics, it wasn't the most serene time in American political history either, which wasn't helping. So, I mean, I remember it because on Tuesday night that we had the jelly bean jump up dinner at the Roadhouse, which we actually filled and sold out as the fundraiser for Safe House Center. And then the next day is when everything started coming apart. And, you know, within a matter of days, it didn't matter that they closed the dining rooms, to be honest, because no one was coming. So the closing of the dining rooms was really secondary to the reality. And in a good way, we're in a community that's well-read and learned and pays attention to what we know more. And so people see what's going on and they listen and they stay home, just like they were supposed to. So it was scary, for sure. We, like many businesses, have some debt. It wasn't particularly acceptable amount of debt, but we have debt, which seemed fine until all of a sudden your sales drop by whatever, 60, 70%, and then it's a lot of debt. And so that was scary. And then we were faced collectively, it's not just me and Paul, it's all partners, with the decisions of what to do, because if the boat's sinking and you can't carry everybody on it, do you go down, all of you together, or do you try to save the boat in hopes that you get the other people back on board? And then, you know, whatever, 275 people that were furloughed, which is a horrible experience when you're in an organization that's all about helping people to grow. And some of them were people who had worked for a really long time with us. So that was pretty horrible. And then we were also faced fairly quickly as everybody in the world was trying to decide what to do. We were among them, and there was no clear path. And we met as the partners group, which was whatever, 20 people, 21 people trying to figure out what to do. And we made a decision, I don't know, 4 weeks in that this is when they still thought it was going to be over by Easter in the dorm room. And we decided that we would stay open unless we absolutely couldn't stay open. We were going to stay open throughout. And for context, I mean, I have good friends who decided to close, not because they weren't going to come back, but it's like, we're going to lose money. I just lose money staying home and relaxing than try to deal with all of the chaos of being in the food business while dealing with the chaos of the pandemic. So it wasn't like it was a bad decision, but we all agreed that we wanted to continue to provide continuity and some sense of comfort and connection and care within the community. And that, you know, we're not whatever is called first responders, but Vic Streffer, who teaches at the School of Public Health and has written a lot about purpose, and he's always told me, like, well, you guys are in healthcare too. And I'm like, yeah. And it was like, no, you really are in healthcare. Because to provide that emotional connection when everything's coming apart is over.
Well, for my part, I mean, the fact that we were able to go to the Roadhouse, we couldn't sit inside, but we could order fried chicken and we could take it to the picnic tables and we could have a Zingerman's experience, even if it was different from the Zingerman's experience that we had. I mean, that saved my life a couple of times. Just the idea that and I'm not kidding. I mean, I took care of my aunt who was 93 at the time and has been passed away, but was able to be home and, you know, she had a wonderful life, but I was her caregiver. And I needed to get out every so often, and I would go over to the Roadhouse and order chicken and eat it on those picnic tables, and that saved my sanity. I think. I mean, I'm very grateful that you were able to figure out a way that we could still be served, and you know, and it was still there.
Well, all the businesses stayed open. Everybody, to Grace's point from before, worked together. It's the whole organization and all the partners. It's whole. And I, you know, when I listen to podcasts and our conversations, and it still happens all the time. Everyone's been home working remotely for the last 2 years. I'm like, I've been at work, I'm gonna leave the swear words out, but I've been at work every day since it started, and I'm going out of town tomorrow night. It's the third time in 2.5 years, and I'm used to 3 times in a month is a regular thing. So, but there are people who maybe in this room who were at home, and people who are regular customers who live alone. And their families are another thing. And so for a lot of them, I didn't know at the time, but I mean, I started to hear from them, and like, this is my human connection.
A mail order especially. I mean, I have so many friends in New York and Boston, and Irene is among them, who placed their orders with Zingerman mail order because you couldn't go to the grocery store. Your bakery might have been closed, but mail orders stayed open. It maybe wasn't being shipped as quickly as it was pre-pandemic, but eventually that box came. I would love to hear from your perspective. We had a lot of conversations.
Well, on the day that we close, and we do have, we're not overly leveraged, but we do have significant debt. And so, you know, I go into the Navy SEAL mode, which is work the problem. So I, that night, started to call customers, friends that we have in the community that are wealthy, trying to secure loans, and trying to give folks an idea of how much I think we need to borrow, and then making connections with folks who are in the venture capital world. Because although that would be a last resort, that certainly would be preferable to having to close. This was all before we had any understanding or knowledge that there would be some government support coming in for employees with unemployment and the $600 stipend, and then also with the PPP loans. None of that was clear yet, and certainly weren't going to really depend on that. And so that was really the mode I went into, was how do we keep this thing going? And that was it. Just do it.
So I've actually talked to some of these people that Paul mentions and learned that the people in venture capital have an extremely high regard for Zingerman, as they do for many brands that are, I wouldn't say Zingerman's like, but if you think about Blue Bottle Coffee, does that mean anything to people? So Blue Bottle started with a single coffee cart out in, I think, San Francisco. And a couple of years ago, that coffee brand sold for $725 million. So I am confident that, first of all, you guys probably could have gotten as much money as you wanted to borrow. And second, that this is very possibly a $1 billion brand. So it is wonderful that you didn't need to tap into them, but they were available, I think. So, and that's a real endorsement of what you and Ari have done and what all the partners have done and everybody who's a team member at Zingerman's done. So it's not just the two of you, it's the whole effort. Grace, I would love to hear you talk about the challenge of the deli specifically during the pandemic.
Well, it's challenging, yeah. That's pretty strange. You know, in hindsight, it's a little bit easier to think about. In the moment when we were, faced with not allowing anybody in the doors, and we were really uncertain what to do. So we have a grocery section of our store, but it's very much connected to the rest of the store. And we didn't know, what would the Department of Health say? So we called them to find out. Then we also had, how comfortable does the staff feel right now with having guests inside? So we made the decision to just totally close the doors. We felt that was the safest thing to do. The restaurant department for selling sandwiches is in a pretty good position. We had already gotten partnered with Snack Pass the fall before. So we already had an online ordering platform that was up and available, but it was like maybe 12% of our total sales, right? Pretty small. And the rest of our sales, we had maybe, 10% that people phoned their orders in. The rest of it was all in person, every single piece. And so we had to quickly pivot and figure out how to start taking all of our orders online or on the phone. We had to take all the phones that were in the offices that were very small spaces where we answered phones. And instead of having 2 or maybe 3 people answering phones, we needed to have like 5 or 6. And so we had to move the phone lines and put them in the dining room and get everybody set up separately. And then we had to figure out how to switch that volume, because the orders that came in on the online platform couldn't just be made. They had to be re-entered into the system, so they didn't have anyone to do. And we also had to reduce our capacity because the sandwich line staff also needed to be 6 feet apart so that they could be safe. So it was a lot of enabling, and thanks to all of you who worked with us through that and still kept ordering sandwiches. But it was quite a reduction in sales, especially food department for groceries. We'd always taken orders by phone. But I don't know, we have a mail order group that does amazing sales, and it's beautiful online website. We just never thought that we would put all of our groceries online for sale. And then one of our really smart managers, who's got this in the room, We're about 2 days in from when we had to shut our doors. She spent 3 days and got our online specialty food order site up. It was only like a top 35 or 40 items since we've expanded it. But within 3 days, she had something up for sale that we could put out to the public so people could buy their groceries. And we had a lot of people, still wanted to get our quality, and they were very thankful that we were open, but it was tricky trying to figure out how to get enough people to answer phones. I know people sat in queues on the phones for a long time, longer than we wanted, trying to figure out how to manage all that. But it did allow us to change some things, and we got very comfortable with change. So I guess one of the upsides, we had to change a lot of things pretty fast, and every time the orders changed, we had to change something else. And so we learned to kind of pivot much quicker. So we all kind of have a much more open mindset about, well, let's try this other thing and see if it works, and let's try this other thing. The catering department was the worst hit. No one was gathering, nobody was having office parties, no one was doing any of that. So they came up with this idea to do a ribbon tour. It was actually Jeff Applebaum, who sold us all the kitchen equipment, called me and said, "There's this pizza place, come into my neighborhood in the Bloomfield Hills. I think you should do something like this." And I was like, "Jeff, that's a great idea." So we got the catering group together, took pre-orders, and we went to Kalamazoo, and we went to Grand Rapids, and Toledo, and Detroit, and Marquette, somewhere way up north, and took Dave Rubens and dropped them off. And then we did a pie truck another time, and we did our pot pies, and we did the bakehouse pies. And so that was one way for them to at least have some events and be able to take things on the road and have some stuff. Because it's really tough. One of the hard things is if we have a group of people who are used to working so hard, the catering department is busy normally, and then it was nothing. So it's just kind of a moral devastation and an emotional challenge. So trying to find work they can do to feel like they're contributing is a big deal.
So I was honored to be able to join the huddle, which is a meeting that Zingerman's has across the organization of all the managing partners and guests like me, which I found to be a really interesting process. And I wonder if that changed at all during the pandemic. I know people were empowered to go out and do what they needed to do for their individual businesses, but what changed about the way you all interacted with each other during the pandemic?
Yeah, the huddles or just in general? Well, the huddles are part of open book management. It's just a term that comes from Great Game of Business, which is the book Paul referenced before. That sort of differentiates it from a meeting, which we also have. So it's where you run the business, as Paul said, and you're involving people, not just showing them financial statements, which is a little like reading box scores. It's interesting for an accountant, but not that interesting for most people. But running the business is very interesting because it's impacting everybody all the time. So I'm going from memory. So Amy helped me out, or Frank or Grace, but we didn't huddle for the first 3 months. We stopped huddling because it was so chaotic and we couldn't get together in person. None of us knew what Zoom was, or I didn't know. I had no idea what Zoom was before the pandemic. Somebody here probably did. But, and I think in mid-June is when we started to huddle. And that was on Zoom. And now some of them have come back in person, but most are still on Zoom, which has a few advantages, like people can log in from bed without getting out of bed in the morning, but it does somewhat lack the interpersonal connectivity that goes with computer form.
So I wanted to bring Paul in because Paul wasn't physically here as much.
Just spiritual.
Spiritually, absolutely. I mean, you can see it floating above the building. But you have another venture in Las Vegas, and I wondered if you would talk about that and then also talk about how you interacted with everybody from a couple of thousand miles away.
Well, I interacted over the phone with my partner Ari several times a week, sometimes a couple times in a day. It wasn't really any different than being here, since we were both usually in different places when we were both here. So it was that communication really didn't change at all. We just kept talking on a regular basis. I did go out to Las Vegas to open a couple of businesses out there. It was a kind of a bucket list dream that I always had. Gambling is in my DNA. My great uncle, Charles Mickey Sherman, was arguably the most famous, well-known bookie in the history of Detroit gambling. And so from an early age, I'd be going to the racetrack with my grandfather. He taught me how to use the slide rule at the racetrack, where I would take the race sheet and I would add up every horse's lifetime winnings and divide it by the number of races they were in, and then rank them. And that's how he would place his bets. And anyway, I got the email equivalent of a cold call about 6 years ago from a man named Derek Stevens, who at that time owned the Las Vegas and the Golden Gate down on Fremont, which is the original Las Vegas Strip, and said that he had an opportunity. He went to the University of Michigan, and he's from Detroit, and he loved our brand, and he had an opportunity to bring it out there. And I emailed him back and said, well, I can't. We don't bring our brand outside of the Ann Arbor area, but what problem are you trying to solve? I love Las Vegas, and I'd love to work on this with you. And so that led into a conversation, and we opened a little coffee stand in his casino, the D. It was an opportunity for us, an outlet for us to sell Zingerman's coffee. It was not a Zingerman's operation. And then he was building a brand new casino and resort. It's the first ground up construction on Fremont Street in the last 40 years. And so I opened a delicatessen there and a cafe there, and then also service to the food service on the pool deck. And so that's where I've been. It was an opportunity for me that I wanted to take. It's also occurring at the time where I'm transitioning out of Zingerman and, you know, making room for the other partners to kind of come up and start to run the organization. And, you know, we're both thinking about our transition out here and what that's going to look like. Pretty exciting, actually. I don't know if we're all ready to talk about it. It's pretty exciting.
This is perfect because this was my next. So while I was writing the book, I know conversations are probably still happening about the possibility of a public stock sale or a way that the public. Why are you shaking your head? Is it not going to happen? A way for the public to buy at-risk shares.
No, we're not.
You're not going to do it?
Not quite yet.
No.
No.
But if you want, we could change what we're doing.
No, tell me how you envision it.
Well, we're still working on it, so I don't want, there's nothing to hide, but I'm a Chicago kid who grew up watching the Bears be up 21 and, 5 minutes to go and lose. So I probably the Lions have the same story. So I'm not averse to talking about it, but
It's not soupy.
I'm loath to say it out loud too much, to jinx it, how when you're 9, like everything. But I think the main thing is to communicate, which, we're not selling the company to some other company. We're not going public. We're not doing all those things. So the idea is to keep Zingerman's here long after Paul and I and whoever else have left, whatever we leave, and to continue so that, my hope, I will be long gone, I would imagine, but 40 years from now, that there's people sitting here or somewhere or some tech version that exists that I can't even think of right now that are still talking about memories, and that there's people here whose kids will have grown up coming here long afterward. That's really the idea, is keep keep something special happening. You know, I do, as you know, in a lot of work and idea of organization like ecosystem, and sort of the standard business model is you grow a forest so you can clear cut it and take the money. And this is the other way, which is the whole growth forest stays there for a long time and becomes an integral part of the ecosystem. So trying to figure out, it sounds good, but trying to figure out how to do that in a way that's legally, ethically, and financially sound is easier said than done, because it's not the model that most people do.
That'll be interesting to see what form it eventually takes. So I would like to ask about the future in the book. The very final chapter is Sarah's vision for 2032, which is basically their document. I actually got a couple of questions from the copy editor at Scribner's about it, and I said, look, don't touch it, it's their document. But I would like to ask you for a couple of highlights from the 2032 vision and what people can keep an eye out for over the next 10 years.
Gonna have to pull it off. Well, I think one of the things that we talked a long time about was the being rooted in Ann Arbor. And what does that mean? And how do we fulfill that to a higher level? So we want to be everyone's Ann Arbor. We want to reach the people that we might not be working with as closely now, and be a resource, and be more invested in this community than ever before. A lot of the partners are sitting on boards and trying to give back to the community. So part of our vision has always been giving 10% of our profits at the end of every year back to the nonprofit community. But you know, we always say this community supports us, and so we want to give back to that community and be a place that supports the community and helps it. So that's part of that vision, is being even more deeply invested in this Ann Arbor community and finding ways to help it thrive and grow in the future. We also talked about what does it look like for our growth of our businesses. We've always had an idea to grow the businesses, and we've always said that we are business partners, and that there is, 12 to 15 different businesses all located in the Ann Arbor Ann Arbor area that all are food related, right? But we realize that maybe that's narrowing a little bit. So part of the vision is that they don't all have to be food related. That there can be other businesses that we would like to have developed that could be part of Zingerman's, that could share our vision and our mission and our guiding principles and still want to work the way that we do, but they don't necessarily have to be food businesses. So that's a very exciting part of what we're doing. There's a lot in there about sustainability and how we want to work together to make a difference. Food businesses can definitely have a huge impact on the environment. And COVID, unfortunately, has been such a negative for that, because everything was to go. My one catering director, Nancy, talked about how, when you do archaeological digs, she's like, they're going to come across the time when it was COVID, and you're just going to splash together, right? So we've been trying to figure out ways to do that. And like one of the things we've done recently is partner with the city on those H0 containers that can be reused. The city wanted to try to get those out, so we partnered with them and talked about what size they need to be and tried to get other restaurants to use them. I'm still working on rolling it out. There's a lot of that in there. What you talking about? What else do we have? Yeah, I'm sure I'm missing about 50 things.
Well, there's a lot in there, a lot to do. Back to Paul's question on the bench, it's really describing where we want to be in 2032. That'll be our 50th anniversary, and as Grace said, because the pandemic started at the same time we were about to roll it out, we haven't really done a ton. But it has a lot more to Paul's earlier point about sharing ownership more widely. So we now have like 230 people in the organization that own a share, and we want a lot more of that, spread it ever more widely, like Paul said. It definitely talks about sustainability. We got a lot of work to do to reduce our ecological footprint. We know that. It talks about making the food better, the service better. It talks about creating a much more effective level of diversity, and really starting to try to rebalance the ecosystem of at least our part of the ecosystem from centuries of bias and all kinds of hurt, but a lot of problematic behaviors that have left people outside of the mainstream and that have systemically pushed people to the periphery, and we want to try to at least rectify our part of that by bringing as many people back into our organization and helping them grow and making a difference in that way. And then the last section of it talks about love in the workplace, which, as I've said many times, if you would have told me in 1982 I'd be talking about that, I would have laughed at you, but we learn. And in 1991, when we wrote the mission statement, Paul appropriately pushed to put love in there. And this is a more overt statement still, which is I've come to believe that healthy organizational ecosystems, love is naturally present. And that could be a business, but it could be a family, it could be and at the same time, it's up to each of us to put love into every action that we take, whether that's how we talk to each other or when we produce craft food or brew a cup of coffee or clean up, is that when we're putting love into that action, we're making a better ecosystem. It makes a difference, and so that's a big thing. But it's about 9 pages long, so there's a lot.
Willing to share it with everybody. You know, it's just, as my partners were saying, it's you know, for us, a vision. There's a lot of definitions of vision. For us, the vision is, it's a definition of success at some point in the future. And this one pinpoints 2032, and it talks about exactly what we would look like, what the scope of our operations are, and you know what our place in this community is. It's our third long-term vision, and we've been pretty good at the first two, and I think we'll also be successful in this one also. We work, you know, we're in it. It's a long game for us. It's not a sprint, and we're here to stay. You know, as far as the future, without you know, talking about specifically the plans, but the idea is that this organization will remain private, although having more ownership within it, and it setting it up so that it cannot be sold. That's really our main goal and what we're trying to accomplish here. So that we're here for a long, long time, and that the community will be better off because we have existed, and that we will leave the community better than we found it. That's the gist of that vision.
And joy, I would think. Right? Lots of joy. So you all are getting cake, those and gelato. Do you want to talk about cake? I don't know what everything is to know about cake.
Well, this is our floor cake. We always joke about it. The big house decorators did a beautiful job. They mimicked the black and white tile on the top. We have chocolate cake with buttercream frosting on the fondant on top. Some of the best cake down. We have gelato from the creamery. We just did standard vanilla gelato. But it was fun this morning. We gave away cake slices to the first 40 people that came in the door. And so we're ending the day with the same cake, well, different cake, but same type of cake for all of you. So I hope you enjoy the cake.
So as you enjoy your cake, there's time for a few questions. I want to make sure that y'all have time to shop, which is kind of like when we were kids and you went down to Hudson's, and I know I'm dating myself, but there was a special when you went up to see Santa on the 12th floor. There was a special room where children could shop. I know people. God, do you remember this? Okay, and if you had money, they'd hit it to your coat, and then you would go around like a room like this, and they had child gifts set out. And then you went up to a cashier, and they looked at your gift, and they looked at the money, and they tried to make sure you had enough money. I bought my mother this plastic apple of multicolored cotton balls. And God bless her, she lived to 102, and when I was cleaning things out, I found the plastic apple. I know, isn't that a sweet story? So anyway, so I digress. I wanted to see if anybody had any questions before I send you down to our very special own Hudson's to shop. So were there any questions? Yes, please. And yeah, like elevate, yes, thank you.
This is for Ari and Paul. If you had a time machine and you could go back 40 years ago, I guess what would you tell yourself on your first day?
Get ready for the pandemic.
Work harder to elect Hillary Clinton.
You know, it's so far in the past in a good way. And I grew up in a family where people argued incessantly over theoreticals with no outcome. Other than that, they killed a lot of time. And I spent much of my adult life training myself not to worry about it because it's good. And I think all the things that we share, I mean, we've learned a ton. And you know, whoever gave who which book, but servant leadership and open book management and visioning, that these are all gifts that we got from other people. I mean, we didn't make this stuff up. It's us learning it, not just being involved by everybody here learning it and adapting it. And they're all great things to have known, but it's sort of like if we knew them in 1982, you know, we're different in a good way. We're true to ourselves, but we're different. So I don't know. I mean, I would have done all of them, but we made it anyway.
Other questions? Anyone else? So the question is, when did you know you had survived the pandemic? Each of you. And was it at a different point where you thought you were going to make it, or did you kind of collectively do?
I don't know if we survived anything yet. I'll tell you truthfully, when Ari and I were both involved in running the deli, and it was, you know, just the two of us here, I used to go down to the front door every morning and open it, and I was not feeling comfortable until the first customer walked in, because I always thought today could be the day that nobody comes here anymore. So I don't think we're out of anything yet. And of course, you know, we have other bigger issues going on right now too. So I just, you know, I feel gratitude every morning I wake up and I have something to do and something to go to.
Pretty much the same. I think one thing that's true for both of us from the beginning, which actually just mentioned in the emails, but we've never taken anything for granted, I don't think. And we've always gotten up in the morning with the intent, and it's true today, and it was true 40 years ago today, that we got to go out and prove to people that it's worth coming here, whether that's you as customers or someone who work here, people who, you know, who work in the business. And then the burden was always on us from the beginning, and the burden's on us now. And I don't go home like I can't sleep at night, but I also don't feel like anything is given to us. And, you know, maybe after all these years, you could, in theory, like coast for a year or two, but lots of places go out of business. And I don't say that in a doom and gloom way, it's just the reality. And it's our job is to go out and put our life. And I don't know, this is the best pandemic I've ever been through. But I don't really know how they wind down. I mean, I'm a history major, so I read a fair bit about the Spanish flu and all that, but we've sort of departed from that. I thought we were going to be on that path, but it hasn't played out that way. And who knows? So we're just gonna keep doing our best every day and hope for the best and try to be, what Paul said, kind and collaborative and keep working.
Yes, please.
How do you have time to do all that amazing, right?
How much sleep? Not enough. But I love sleep. Don't get me wrong. I could sleep like 12 hours a day, but it doesn't leave a lot of time for myself. I don't know. You know, there's not a lot that my mother made me do that I'm appreciative of. There's like one thing, which is that she pushed me really hard to take typing in high school. And not like I was ever the greatest typist, although now I'm probably pretty fast, but if you can type faster, it's really an advantage right now in the world. No, it is. I mean, because people like, I could get a lot of words, and then it took me a long time of learning to just write from the heart and not overthink everything. I mean, I used to rip up paper and get super frustrated. And Brenda Euland's book, If You Want to Write, which was written in 1938, she taught me, you know, she's been like, why don't people understand that writing is just talking on paper? And then I was like, oh yeah, why am I making myself crazy? Just say what I want to say and stop worrying about whether it's words properly or whatever. So, I don't know. And then, like Paul said, just keep, like, reading is the raw material for writing, and being present in the world is raw material for writing. So, like, every 5 seconds, there's something happening that's interesting that I'm learning from, and then just things to share helps us as an organization too, I hope. It's about the artwork.
I don't know about the artwork in this. In general, you know, when we, early on, when we were open, a young man started to work for us. His name is Steve Muno. I think he was a photography student, and he was a pretty good graphic artist. And back then, we were putting, you know, label signs on the cheeses and the products, and they generally looked pretty bad, and it hurt his aesthetic sense. He started making all the signs for us, and he got busier, and then one day a week, all he would do is work on signs, and that kind of developed into being our art department and our first art director, and the only employee in the art department. But then, and he created our font, which is called Muno Bold, and documented it, and then taught other people how to do it. And then, and over the years, we've had some really amazing creative, artistic people work for us. And we, you know, we wanted to, we fought, we pushed really hard not to be called a gourmet food store, but more a specialty food store. And it was that good food is for everyone. And we wanted people to feel comfortable coming in and comfortable asking for a taste. And so we didn't want to look like a exquisite jewelry store. And that's how it came about that, you know, it's whimsical and almost comical and what the graphics are. And that just carried on through the years.
One last question? Okay, then yell, please.
All right, so Ari, this one is, you know, start reading what is the breakfast in a red light for these?
Oh. So thank you. The question is, so, yes, it doesn't happen that often. I have a standing offer that anybody who gets a customer complaint that they were too enthusiastic, that I'll buy them whatever lunch or breakfast is. And it just came because we wanted people to be enthusiastic, and many of us have the anxiety that you could be too enthusiastic. And so people tone it down and hold in what they could do in terms of creative human interaction. And so I just wanted to remove that barrier, because the reality is 40 years of data, we get like one of those a year, and then, we do better than most on our customer service, but we still get complaints where we fall short. And one of us, could be me, didn't do a good enough job of engaging with the guests. So it's like, okay, we get, I don't know, whatever, 500 of these and one of these. I'm gonna just remove this worry for you, and we're gonna make it into a good thing. If you get that complaint, and it can happen because whatever, the guest was having a really hard day and they didn't want to hear it, I'll take that problem. Because we learned early, it doesn't mean you get better problem. And that's a better problem than having what most places have, which is very passive, disengaged, cynical service. We didn't want that. Does that help? Thanks for asking. Well, there's still time. We're hiring.
All right, everybody. So I've been here for 15 years of this last 40. 2006 was my first holiday out at mail order, answering phones. So I've been really fortunate to be a part of a lot of this. I'm also fortunate that tonight, this is my job of welcoming all of you to. I have one of those unicorn jobs. And the last 15 years, one of the things that we talk a lot about in this organization is a culture of appreciation. So I'm going to end with a couple of quick appreciations before we turn you loose on my colleagues downstairs who are eagerly awaiting their shopping. First and foremost, I want to thank our panelists tonight, Ari, Paul, Grace, and Micki. The cumulative experience at this table has taught me a lot over the last 15 years. I want to thank Rob and Liliana and Jen and Emily and Jenny and Bee, who are all part of our service team upstairs tonight. Without your help, I could not do my job in making this all seem relatively seamless. So huge thanks to them. I want to thank our friends down on the sandwich line who made all of those glorious ribbons. And last but not least, I want to thank all of you for joining us and helping us make this anniversary a good one. It's been a weird couple of years, and it's really exciting to be able to welcome you all back into our space and celebrate a new year turning over and getting ready for what's coming. So thank you all. If you are interested in having any of these guys personalized books, whether that's anybody at this table really, we're going to encourage everybody to head downstairs so that they don't get mobbed and stuck here. That being said, they are all willing to personalize books. If you didn't get a book as part of your ticket and you want a book, we've got some of them back of this room and then down on the sales floor. If you want to buy a copy, we're happy to bring you out downstairs. Grace, do you have any? Oh, yes. You all get a really lovely 20% off discount just for shopping with us tonight. You don't have to show anything. The fact that you're still in the building gets you that magic discount. We are going to send out our usual post-tasting survey in email form, so you'll all get that in your inbox bright and early tomorrow morning. And if you'd rather shop another day, we are giving you a coupon that you can use for the next week in our online store.
So I also want to appreciate a lot, and I'm not going to keep you here all night with all of them, but you know, Paul and I are sitting up here with Grace and Mickey, but this is always a collective effort. And there's Frank and Amy are here. There's whatever, 18 other partners, 750 or whatever other people working in the organization. None of us would be here without the other, and I never forget that. And I've long since lost track of how many people have worked here over the years, but it's thousands, and they've all contributed to what we are today, and I never forget that either. And we really wouldn't be where we are without everybody who's worked here. And then also just to be in such a special place is no small thing. And I didn't say it when we were talking about the pandemic, but early on, I realized that we were like dust. It was bad to be in the pandemic, but I have felt throughout super fortunate to be in such a positive community where we were generally free from some of the tensions of the greater country, and to be in a place where people are still caring and supportive of what we do, and bring love and compassion. So thank you, and then Polly, thank you. 40 years, and we still like each other, and we still like coming to work, and then, you know, Frank was there from the beginning, and he's the one who taught me how to cook and how to prep. If he had done that, I wouldn't be here either. So thank you for that, and Amy, thank you for all of what you do and how much you guys have made the big house into something special for our organization. So I could go on forever, but Micki, thank you for putting 2 years of your life into creating that book, and Grace 15 years. So I'll shut up now.
I also want to express appreciation for all of my partners. I truly believe if I have any talent at all, it's in picking good partners and getting out of their way. So that's really the secret to why I've been fortunate and blessed with success. And then also the best partner I ever picked is over here. It's my wife, Lori Saginaw. And yesterday we celebrated 46 years of marriage. And I appreciate my soon-to-be 100-year-old on May 13th mother-in-law who brought Lori into the